Be ready. 5 seconds. Start. Mr. Deputy Chairman, I support the motion for reference of the bill to a joint select committee. I heartily welcome the provisions of this measure meant to ameliorate the conditions of workers in the road transport industry. This industry has tremendously increased in recent times, so much so that even railways are afraid of competition from road transport in carrying goods and passengers for long distances. We have made enactments for all the big industries. We have got separate legislation for plantations, for coal, and for others to protect the wages and to provide good working conditions to the workers employed in those industries. Because of the expanding nature of this industry, this bill was necessary and is most welcome. While welcoming this measure, I would like to make some observations on the clauses for the consideration of the Joint Select Committee. With regard to Clause 1 dealing with definitions, the provisions of the bill apply only to those undertakings which employ more than 10 workers. Under certain circumstances, it can be extended to those undertakings which employ even 5 workers. I know that the government have their difficulties in applying the provisions to each individual working in this industry, and that has got to be appreciated. But we have got a fear that this might lead to fragmentation of some of the bigger units. We have got before the House a bill to amend the Plantations Labour Act, brought before the House only for making a provision to check fragmentation of tea gardens, so that tendency is there, the tendency to break law even among the big ones. Therefore, I suspect that this provision is likely to be misused by some undertakings, and there might be a tendency for fragmentation. I am glad that my friend Mr. Verma has just suggested that an attempt should be made to take viable units. Of course, there are many transport cooperative societies working at present, and there is a tendency to operate these services on a cooperative basis. To avoid any misuse of the Act, my request to the Honourable Minister would be that this bill should be made applicable to everybody. This has got to be done, otherwise there will be fragmentation and there will be a tendency to employ 5 or less than 5 workers. Thousands of trucks and buses are running in the country which are working individually. Sir, I am glad that with regard to the other provisions, this bill has followed the Factories Act. I am glad that all the good provisions of the Factories Act have been incorporated in this bill at the very outset. We have got the experience that the provisions on the Factory Acts were applied even in the case of mines after a long time. We had to wait for a long time even for the application of overtime rules under the Factories Act. I am glad that provisions relating to wages, hours of work, overtime, etc. have been made applicable, and that the workers in the road transport industry will have the advantage of all these factories which have been allowed under the Factories Act from the start. I may, however, point out that in Chapter 5, dealing with hours and limitation of employment, provision has been made that workers could be relieved after rendering 10 hours duty. This provision appears to me to be extraordinary. I know the difficulties of the road transport industry. The conditions of working are quite different from the ordinary factories. They have to work all the 24 hours, and it is very difficult to stipulate anything so far as hours of work are concerned. But still, I may submit that nowhere in no industry the working hours prescribed are more than 9 hours. So, this will have to be taken into consideration while considering the working hours of workers in the road transport industry. With regard to Chapter 7, Wages and Leave, I am glad that provision for overtime has been made in accordance with the Factories Act. I have to observe that though clause 29 of this bill is a copy of section 79 of the Factories Act, some of the explanations and provisions which have been made only to clarify and position and not to add to the facilities or advantages have been omitted. The provisions are about the system of estimated wages, etc. Those provisions may also be included in the present bill. Then, sir, some observations were made by some members. One of them was that the Payment of Wages Act does not apply to these workers. I submit that it does not apply, and clause 27 of this bill provides for it. There were some other observations also, that some other facilities like health insurance and other things have not been provided. I hope that the State Insurance Act will be made applicable to the workers. If it is not applicable, or if it cannot be applied in the present form, necessary amendments may be made.